How can we redefine toxic masculinity? And what is the sacred masculine and feminine?
Imagine your energy field as a kind of like a pie chart. And if we divide that chart into four pieces of pie, and we allocate one piece of pie to the sacred masculine, one piece of pie to the sacred feminine. And if you don't have to refer to it as sacred, you can refer to it as integrated or harmonious.
Yeah.
And then you've got another two pieces of pie left. And those two pieces are allocated to the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine. I don't use the language of toxic because these aspects are not toxic. They are simply wounded, and all aspects of life have got an aspect that is in harmony and an aspect that is in disharmony. Ideally, in an ideal world, if we were perfect manifestations of harmony and balance, we would have much bigger slices allocated to the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, and just maybe a little sliver of those wounded aspects, just to keep things exciting. Within ourselves, we can sit and witness where we are responding from and how those energetic shifts within us in different situations or different environments or in general in our life, how they impact and affect the way that we move and the way that we exist within the world.
That which you most need to find is found where you least want to look. Welcome to the Sought and Found podcast, your gateway to the world of holistic health and wellness.
Welcome to another episode of the Sought and Found podcast. I'm your host, Gareth Catesy, and together we'll explore the uncharted realms of holistic health. We dive deep into the mysteries of how to better your mind, body, and spirit. My mission is to have conversations and interview speakers and thought leaders in the holistic health space to help empower you on how to better your health. This week, we speak to Issa Kara, a shamanic energy practitioner. We had a profound and enlightening conversation about the sacred masculine and feminine. Is toxic masculinity really another form of the wounded masculine? And how can we start to heal the wounded parts of ourselves by learning to listen and holding space with uncomfortable emotions? I hope you enjoy this week's podcast, and I hate to say it, but please remember to subscribe so we can grow our channel and grow the guests we bring onto the show. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks. Maybe we can start off just by introducing yourself. I know you have two names, one from the past, one from the present. Maybe we can just start with that.
Cool. Okay, so my name is Issa, or Issa Kara. I received that name in 2019, and my instructions were to work for the next 2 years until I was ready to carry that name, which was when I turned 40, and I went through further initiations into that name. So yeah, Gary, you still know me as Gisela. And so I do technically carry both names, but I did make that transition when I turned 40, which was 2 years ago now.
What is the meaning behind the name?
It's the meaning's quite complex, and it's quite personal to me. But it was the name that I was given as I went through certain initiations, and the name that I was guided to carry from my 40th year. So that's what I've done, and it's been quite an interesting transition to move through the process of disentangling oneself from your kind of given name and the identity that goes with that, and then stepping into a bit less of attachment around personal identity, which is part of doing this kind of work as well. So we have to be quite careful not to project our personal identities and our personal ideologies onto the work and onto people that we work with.
So you spoke about initiations and not projecting yourself onto people you're working with. What kind of work do you do? And what initiations have you gone through?
So both of those are difficult questions to answer. I am a shamanic energy medicine practitioner. In part, it's part of the work I do. My focus is on sacred feminine practices, and those practices through the shamanic lineages. And, initiation is a complex thing because there are structured initiations that we go through with our teachers. There are less structured initiations that we go through with more non-physical teachers or unseen realms. And then there's physical initiations that are processes that happen during one's life, usually starting in childhood and then moving up into adulthood. So yeah, there's speaking about initiation is a complex conversation in itself. Because they come in many forms.
Do you think we've maybe lost the communal initiation into various stages of life in modern society?
Yeah, absolutely. We our current consensus social structure, our consensus reality, is very much based on separation and segregation. We live in a very unnatural way, very separate from one another. We live in these little nuclear families that are quite unnatural. A lot of emphasis and expectation is put on mothers to be millions of different things, but in isolation from one another, which in itself is unnatural. Women should be parenting, mothering in community. And through that, we've also lost our rights that we would have collectively gone through, rights of initiation, rights of moving into womanhood, moving into manhood, holding each other in a collective space. We find other ways to initiate through these kind of phases in our lives because it is a natural part of growing as a human being. So we still have variations of these communal initiations. Even things like graduating from school or
yes,
certain religious practices, things like that. There are forms of them, but collectively we are missing a little bit of our rites of initiation. Yeah. And we suffer for it as a culture and as a society, definitely.
So just to go a bit back, if you didn't know what shamanism was, how would you describe that? I think what you once said to me, despite all the ideology and symbolism and things and metaphor and myth around it, it's something as simple as simply listening. So I don't know if you could explain it, in a broader sense.
Shaman or shamanic or shamanism has been quite distorted. I am very, very careful of not calling myself a shaman because I'm not. That word, it relates specifically to a specific region and to specific people in that region. And it's not really a word that can be used ubiquitously to describe anyone who falls under the banner of this kind of practice. So in our modern kind of Western format, none of us are shamans. We connect to certain lineages and we commit to certain practices, and that term shamanism has become sort of a catch-all, which helps to simplify and bring understanding to systems of belief and systems of working with the unseen realms and working with the natural world and working with the spirit world. That is not always easily understood in our cultural framework today, but it is a bit of a catch-all term. And in a way, it then dilutes a little bit the depths of the work that people do as individuals. And of course, each, if we really track it back into the different lineages, the practices in different areas are unique to the people and to the places. So it's not really something that we can copy and paste and just repeat verbatim in different spaces. We have to become present with the land where we are, and really be in communication with the spirit world where we are, and be in clear and respectful service of our own ancestral lineages. And, when I say ancestral lineages, I'm not speaking of cultural bloodlines. I'm speaking a little bit deeper. Our ancestral lineages stretch into the earth, into the rivers, into the animals, into the mountains. We are connected to multi-dimensional realities and states of being. We have many lives that are lived across many timelines. So, when we speak about ancestors, we're not speaking simply about the people who gave birth to you and those that gave birth to them. We're not speaking simply about the bloodline. We're speaking on a much more complex level. But we also always have to be respectful of people's blood and their individual cultural practices and their individual traditions. And so shamanism is a complex term. It's one that that we need to use consciously. But it is a bit of a catch-all for lots of different practices. And it's one that we use, also as a woman and as a practitioner of this kind of medicine. It's one that I use because people find it more palatable than to say I'm a witch. People still struggle very much with that terminology and that language, and it's got all kinds of connotations to all kinds of utter nonsense because of certain indoctrinative processes, and we still carry quite deep wounds around that word. It's one that we kind of dance around with all these other terminologies.
I often think how many people are burned at the stake just for enjoying nature or appreciating or worshipping nature, maybe. Like, we've now kind of gone through what a shaman is. What do you think are some of the principles or ideas that maybe shamanism as a collective holds? Because it certainly seems, even though each culture has very unique and individual practices to their location, I've also read a few books, and there's so many similarities that go across massive boundaries in terms of practices and rituals and ideas and beliefs. So I don't know if there's any of those you'd like to touch on.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. If we start to really look at the practices, and even for myself, initiations that I've been through with different cultural lineages, but they're all basically the same, even though they come from such different places in the world. The baseline, the kind of core of the practice, the core principles, even though they use different language, they are the same. So you might refer to things by different names or different terminology, or have different imagery involved, or apply to different archetypes, different animals, different, directions, but fundamentally working with the same energetic principles. And I think that's the thing that's so beautiful about this kind of practice, is that it doesn't define itself through a state of separatism. It defines itself through a state of unity and through a deeper connection with both the physical seen world, the world that we live in and exist in, but also the unseen realms and those archetypal awarenesses and energetic presences of that. So, like you say, even though there are very individual and unique ways of interacting with these different concepts in different cultures, there is also a beautiful thread that connects them all to one another. And there lies this really deep understanding that it's part of our human nature to work with the world around us in this way. It really is part of our nature. And that's why these practices have been around for so long. They predate all forms of religion and systems of belief. They really go back to the core of what it means to be a human, on this planet, in this realm. And they open us to understanding how interconnected we are to the earth, but also to the universe as a greater kind of concept and living being, living entity. And really that we are not separate from one another. And that the more we open ourselves into that state of listening, which you mentioned earlier that we have talked about before, it really is about dropping into deep, open and receptive state of listening. And from that, we can receive guidance, we can receive information, we can receive medicine, we can receive teachings, we can remember things, we can, receive information about, the potential future outcomes of things. It's all just about releasing ourselves from our projections and our egoic identities, and our desperate need to self-individualize, and just dropping into a state of quiet and listening. Yeah,
I think for modern people these days, it's almost so hard to drop in and listen, especially if you're in a city context or something. There's so much overwhelming information, just general noise around you. It's so hard to just be still and listen and tune in with your own nature. One thing I would like to touch on is you spoke about the sacred feminine and the working with the sacred feminine. I don't know if we can touch on the principle of, I guess, sacred genders and what that is.
Yeah. So when we are, this is such a kind of tricky subject to approach, because we are so deeply identified with this idea of gender and our kind of, our identities around that. But
maybe to maybe help simplify it, and to start with, instead of trying to separate the genders into, masculine and feminine, which I would like to go into, but more like how a person can embody both of those and what that means. Yeah.
So the way that I find it easiest to kind of understand for myself as well, and what I perceive to be the easiest way of explaining this concept, is that when we talk about the genders from an energetic perspective, we're not talking about biology. We're talking about energetics. So we're talking about how the energy field manifests into a physical expression. So whether you are a man or a woman or whatever you identify as, your biology is not what we're looking at in this instance.
Yeah.
We're looking at the balance of, and the way that I understand it and simplify it really to its most kind of basic format and make it the easiest way to understand, is if you imagine your energy field as a kind of like a pie chart. And if we divide that chart into four pieces of pie, and we allocate one piece of pie to the sacred masculine, one piece of pie to the sacred feminine. And if you don't have to refer to it as sacred, you can refer to it as integrated or harmonious, or, there's lots of different languages, but, for simplicity's sake, let's use the terminology of sacred. And then you've got another two pieces of pie left, and those two pieces are allocated to the wounded masculine and the wounded feminine. I don't use the language of toxic because these aspects are not toxic. They are simply wounded, and all aspects of life have got an aspect that is in harmony and an aspect that is in disharmony. It's part of the natural world. It's part of us as human beings. So we also have that within ourselves. We have parts of us that are in harmony and parts of us that are in disharmony. So when we're looking at this energetic structure from the perspective of masculine and feminine energies, or masculine and feminine forces, then we can break it down into these four slices of pie, basically. So we've got our sacred masculine, our sacred feminine, our wounded masculine, our wounded feminine. Ideally, in an ideal world, if we were perfect manifestations of harmony and balance, we would have much bigger slices allocated to the sacred masculine and sacred feminine, and just maybe a little sliver of those wounded aspects, just to keep things exciting, keep things interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, though, in the inverted consensus reality that we find ourselves in, we generally have a greater kind of part of our pie chart being taken up by the wounded elements, wounded aspects, and a much smaller part by those sacred, harmonious, or integrated aspects. And we can, within ourselves, we can sit and witness where we are responding from and how those energetic shifts within us in different situations or different environments or in general in our life, how they impact and affect the way that we move and the way that we exist within the world, the way that we relate to one another and the way that we relate to ourselves. So they have certain characteristics, certain attributes that we can go, okay, that is more, I'm embodying more of my integrated masculine here, or I'm a little bit in my wounded feminine when this happens. And having just a basic understanding of how those things manifest within ourselves brings us greater awareness, and it helps us to detach a little bit from our kind of over identification with our personalities or our identities. And when we do that, we mature. Yeah, which is important for us as a society to begin to mature.
Yes, I feel a lot of, as you said, what's labeled as toxic masculinity is actually the wounded masculine, and it's not. So how would one that has a wounded masculine start to work with it and integrate it so that they can basically bring the sacred masculine into, actualization?
Well, I think as with anything, with any wound or anything that's unhealed, whether it's physical or emotional or energetic, we have to acknowledge that it exists first. If you have a cut on your body and you ignore it and you don't look after it and you just pretend like it's not there, the chances of it getting infected and becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger problem and a bigger sore is likely. Whereas if you go, oh goodness, I have a cut, let me clean it and dress it and look after it until it's healed, then you can heal. So I think the first step is always to acknowledge that we are embodying a certain energetic state. So, there's enough literature and information available to look up. Gary, I'm happy to also put some stuff together if you'd like that you can attach to this podcast. I'm not sure if that's possible.
Thanks. Yeah,
but just with a little bit of a basic outline of, how does the wounded masculine or the wounded feminine present itself? And with the wounded masculine, we're looking at attributes like aggressiveness, like domineering personalities, like an over-reliance on intellect, like a lack of compassion, lack of empathy, misogyny, these kinds of aspects. And these are not aspects that are only applicable to men. They're applicable to women as well. So when, as a woman, am I acting and behaving from my wounded masculine? What triggers that? What environment makes me become that wounded masculine animal? And what environments do I behave more from my wounded feminine? The wounded feminine tends to go for the martyrdom or the manipulation or the sort of bitchiness or the mistrust of other women or lack of self-worth, lack of boundaries, all of these kind of characteristics that weaken the feminine state and close the feminine off. When the feminine is in its most open and activated and strongest form, it's in a state of receptivity. The feminine within us is that part within us that is able to receive whatever it is from the environment around us and transmute and transform that into something greater to give back to the world. And that's applicable to men and to women. When your feminine is strong and active, it means that you are capable of taking negative energy or complex situations or problematic experience or grief, especially experiences like grief, and you're able to sit with them and hold them and embody a state of transformation, and then bring those things back out in the world as understanding or wisdom or knowledge or medicine or love. That is the capacity of the integrated feminine. And we all carry that, whether you are in a male body or in a female body, biologically. So having an understanding, these concepts seem very sort of esoteric and fluffy, but they're not really, because they have a direct impact on the way that we experience our day-to-day life. If that wounded masculine is triggered, you experience all environments as adversarial. So everywhere you go, you're on guard, and there's an adversary, and there's a problem, and there's someone that you need to dominate or attack, or someone's after you. If your wounded feminine is activated, the same thing happens, but the response is different. You feel weakened, you feel under threat, you don't feel safe, you don't feel that you can take up space, you don't feel like you can use your voice. And contrary to that, when the more integrated, the more harmonious aspects are activated, we feel a sense of sovereignty within ourselves. We have strong boundaries, we can see clearly the world around us, we have the ability to be empathetic and compassionate to others without feeling a sense of losing ourselves or negating our own needs or desires. So it really does, having just a little bit of a conscious awareness of the states that we exist within and how that affects our energy field, because it also affects our health, it affects our well-being. It can make a real tangible difference to our day-to-day life experience. It's not always just about this greater esoteric understanding.
Now I feel as you said, it's just being consciously aware of these things, and that can even be 10 seconds after or a few days, like where was that anger coming from, or wow, that was a misogynistic thought, or where does it come from, and how can you work on it? I was there's that idea of polarity, of that it's all really the same side, like it's two sides to the same coin, and maybe if you're an incredibly aggressive person and you work on that and integrate it into yourself, then you can become quite assertive in the world and not be pushed over. So I'm just trying to think. Why do you feel it's such a big collective problem, or why is it projected that way, especially onto masculinity at the moment?
I think, we have to become very honest of the state of the world that we live in, and without assigning blame or projecting any kind of it's this sector's fault. It's the them. It's not about, there isn't some them out there. There's only an us. So there's a we and there's an us, and we are everyone. But we have to acknowledge that the patriarchal consensus reality that we exist within is fundamentally anchored into the expression and the projection of the wounded feminine and the wounded masculine. So it's not men. It is not men are doing this and therefore X, Y, Z. This is the state we find ourselves in. It is a collective over-expression and over-reliance on the wounded aspects of our psyche and of our energetic. There's an energetic imbalance, and that has created, an almost like it's like the poles of the earth shifting and creating an inverted reality. And that's what we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in this inversion of reality, and with structures of control and structures of separation and structures of really the degradation and degrading of the natural order of the universe and the order of the planet and the natural world that we as human beings are a part of. We are only animals. We are not some separate higher functioning being. We are animals. And at the moment we are living in discord with the natural world and with the world around us. And that is what has been born out of this patriarchal dysfunction. And that's not to say that now we have to move into a matriarchal society and that's going to magically fix everything, but we have to begin to look at these things from a perspective of maturity and from a very, 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 very deep capacity for compassion for ourselves and for one another. And we have to be brutally and radically honest within each of us about our culpability in the situation that we find ourselves in, because every single one of us is culpable. Every time that we exist from this place of wounding, we are adding energy, we are adding fuel to this dysfunctional environment and this dysfunctional consensus reality. So we have to begin to step back as individuals and work on ourselves for the collective, not work on ourselves for ourselves. So I think when we speak about doing this sort of sacred feminine work, it's very much anchored into working for the collective and understanding that we are not separate from one another and that we are deeply, deeply interconnected, and that if one of us is suffering, we're all suffering. If one of us is not free, none of us is free, and working consciously on ourselves to be aware of our egoic desires for self-individualization or hyper-individualization, to put ourselves in the center and, just bring awareness to that. How am I affecting the collective? Through my thoughts, through my ideologies, through my behavior, through my actions. And what can I begin to do to live in, greater reciprocity, greater balance, greater harmony with the world around me? Even things like, concepts or in the expressions like misogyny. Misogyny is not something that is just a male issue. We are deeply misogynistic as women as well. So simply acknowledging to ourselves, when am I acting from this place of misogyny? And that's a very simple kind of baseline egoic example. We can go into much, much, much deeper realms than that. But it's I think fundamentally we're talking about self-responsibility, and then how does myself affect the collective, and what is my culpability in the collective experience? Because we don't exist in isolation of one another.
So if someone is feeling an energetic imbalance, whether it's with their own wounded masculine or feminine, how if this is all new to you in energy work and the concepts of shamanism, how would you identify that there is an energetic imbalance, and is there any techniques one could use to start to bring that into harmony?
I think obviously it's dependent on the person and kind of what sort of things would resonate for them. So again, I don't think there's sort of a catch-all, one size fits all. If you are perhaps someone who's a little bit more analytical and less drawn to the more sort of esoteric, or energetic concepts, then you can look more from the perspective of psychology. Then you can look at what are the traits that the unhealed masculine, or the unintegrated masculine, the unintegrated feminine would project. What kind of behaviors, what kind of responses, what kind of thought patterns, and then what would be a more, harmonious version of that, and start to just, from a psychological perspective, work towards that. And even just acknowledging, okay, in these environments, I notice that this, we like to use the word, the triggers get thrown around a lot, but I actually prefer the word activator or activation, because these things become active then in our field. So what activates my wounded masculine? Which environments activates that wounded masculine? And then when it becomes activated, how is it expressed? Do I become more aggressive? Do I bully people? Do I have less compassion or less empathy? Do I become a little bit narcissistic and a little bit self-involved and self-important? And what lies beneath that? Does it get triggered because I feel fear? Does it, And it usually is, we can usually trace it back to some form of feeling fear. Fear is often at the base of a lot of our emotional responses. We feel under threat, we feel fearful, and then we lash out in some way, or we contract and we pull away. And then we can also, if you are more inclined to look at things from a physical perspective, then we can go into the nervous system. What is the nervous system response? So am I in my sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress response nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn activation? And then what practices can you do to regulate your nervous system? So if you find that certain environments triggers that wounded masculine, that makes you feel more aggressive or more defensive, or more like the world around you is predatory, what can you do to soothe your nervous system and bring you back into a better state of regulation? And those are all quite non-esoteric ways of approaching this kind of way of being. And if we want to work from a more energetic perspective, then we drop more into that listening state, more into that feeling state. What is it that I feel energetically in my body? Where do I feel it? So, let's say a certain environment triggers that wounded feminine. Where do I feel it in my body? Do I feel it in my heart? Is it in my solar plexus? I'm closing my body off. Do I find that I suddenly go up into my thinking mind and activate that intellectual mind that just runs around in circles, tries to think its way out of a situation or a problem? Then we can feel more. And how does that energy affect the space around me? When we become more aware of our energetic states, then we start to notice how it affects the world around us, because it's not just an internal experience. We actually change the frequency of the space that we exist within, when certain things get activated within us. So then how are my animals responding to me? How is my partner responding to me? Have I had one of those days where it seems like everything's going wrong? Like I dropped my favorite cup, then I reversed into the tree, then I stubbed my toe, then my boss was an ass. Am I having one of those days where it seems like the world has just turned against me? How am I involved? Okay, I see. This wounded aspect of me is very, very active today. I can feel it, I'm feeling like a victim. Yeah.
Is it a masculine response to try and find an instant solution, as opposed to just kind of sitting and bearing with it? Because I think that's you're always looking for what's the instant, go sit in the ice bath or something.
Yeah, I mean that if we really simplify it, the masculine is the doing force and the feminine is the being force, you know. So I like to sometimes think about it as just a nice kind of visual to use, or a nice analogy to use, is to think of the feminine creative forces within us is like the water of a river, and that integrated sacred masculine is like the river banks. So the river bank holds the water and directs it, and the water flows, and the river, you know, when the river bank is strong, that water can cut through mountains, you know, but it needs a nice, strong holding force so that it doesn't dissipate, so that it doesn't spill all over the place and just, you know, dry up under the sun. So the two they really need each other. They need to work in unison with one another and in balance and in harmony with one another. So yes, we do tend to become, you know, we tend to want to be reactive and do something because, you know, as human beings, we don't like to feel internal states of discomfort. So even practices that give us external states of discomfort, we prefer those because we feel we have a sense of control over those. And they can be beneficial, you know, like an ice bath or, you know, intense exercise or whatever, you know, whatever the practice might be, the physical practice might be. Yes, you understand that you're going to be in a state of discomfort for X amount of time, but then you will find relief, you know. So we can utilize those practices to help to integrate internal states of discomfort, but they also have a flip side where they start to distract us from our internal states of discomfort, where we don't want to sit, you know. And that is something that I'm witnessing collectively as becoming quite important for us to discern when we are utilizing these practices to escape from our internal discomfort, and when we're utilizing them effectively as part of a greater practice, you know, to take us deeper. You know, because, you know, even if we look at what's happening in the world at the moment, and not just now, but how, you know, the general state of the world, we are sitting with phenomenal, deep layers of grief moving through us as human beings. And we don't want to sit with that grief. We don't want to feel it. It's difficult to feel it. It's overwhelming.
It's
you know, it's not a pleasant experience. So we want to run away from it in whichever way possible. But we really do need to learn to sit with our internal discomfort, you know. And again, we come back to listening, you know, to just sit with it quietly and listen without trying to find a solution, without finding the fix, without finding, you know, making it better. We have to learn to just go, okay, I'm going to sit and listen to this pain, to this grief, to this sadness, to this loss, you know, to the frustration, and just be present with it. And there we access a slightly more sacred feminine state of being, the capacity to hold and to just be, and be open to that transformative, that alchemizing capacity of feminine. But we want the balance, you know, because we also need that dynamic aspect of the masculine that goes, okay, let's do something. Let's do something about it, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like the masculine and the feminine are like the ultimate complementary force. And it doesn't often get looked at, you know, like I think that yin and yang symbol is the ultimate representation because it's contained within the circle and a little bit of each and both. But yeah, I blanked out there.
An interesting way to look at that symbol as well, the yin and yang symbol, you know, with the if we look at the black and then the white and then a little bit of white in the black and a little bit of black in the white, you know, it's really speaks to us of harmony and of how things can be in harmony, even if they aren't in equal proportion, but there's harmony. But it also speaks to us of if we are of our myopic nature as human beings. So if you were to imagine that you could stand on a massive version of that symbol, okay, let's say it's as big as this whole country, and if you were placed in the black bit, all you would see around you would be darkness, and you would believe that the whole of the world is in complete darkness. And if you were placed in the white bit, all you would see would be this bright light, and you could come to believe that the whole world is just this very, very bright light. But that's not true. That's just your myopic perception, because that's all you can perceive around you, you know. And that's where, again, it becomes important for us to expand a little bit outwards from our own tiny little, you know, this is my bubble, and to drop into a deeper state of experience that even though everything around me looks dark, because that's all I can see right now, there is balance, you know. So when we again come to this idea of sitting with our individual and with, you know, collective grief, or whatever that I'm using that as a you know, a way to connect with this concept. It's that the magnitude of the collective grief has an equal and opposite aspect to it.
Yeah.
As much as there is that overwhelming grief, there is also its counterpart, that overwhelming unconditional love and hope. Yeah.
I think that's a part that's probably missed in terms of what's sold on the news and media, is you aren't sold the balance. I know for like my gran, she sits very deeply in the grief and she watches the news all day, you know, like it's a hard one when you are in that utter darkness. For someone to even mention the idea that things could be in balance is almost it can be insulting at times, or hurtful. But it is a belief that I hold, and it's also one that has sustained me through like tough times, you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know. We want to increase our capacity in all directions. So we don't just want to increase our capacity, you know. We sort of love language of, you know, abundance and joy and self-care and all of these lovely things, you know. We don't just want to increase our capacity for that. It has to be equal and opposite. So if we're going to increase our capacity for joy and abundance and all kinds of lovely things, we have to also increase our capacity for suffering and pain and, you know, the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
Because things will always, in the natural world, they will always be balanced. They will always seek harmony, you know. And that's important to remember that if we want to have more, we also have to understand and accept having less, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, we have to find that balance within ourselves. You know, and that's where it also, you know, it's important for us to learn to sit with uncomfortable internal structures and internal emotional experiences, because it's not about wallowing or feeling sorry for yourself, or, you know, sort of woe is me, everything is terrible, I'm just going to sit here and, you know, collapse. It's about going, wow, look at the depth within me, my depth of compassion, my depth of empathy, my depth of capacity to feel, and then still, you know, have a laugh with the person I love, or enjoy time with my child, or see the beauty outside my window and be moved to tears by the natural beauty around me. You know, we can hold both at the same time, you know. I
think like it's probably worth touching on, making that distinction is sitting and holding it like the same as compulsively thinking about the problem nonstop and looping out, because that it seems to be like that can be the state for a lot of people, is just to be stuck in the loop, as opposed to maybe sitting with it on a deeper, more energetic level, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes important again for ourselves to check in, because you can feel it actually in your body. Okay, so if you are absorbing lots of negative information, let's say from the media or from social media or from the world around you, whatever, wherever
You
it's,
know it.
yeah, you know it,
Yeah.
and what you'll find is it's going to sit here. It's going to sit here in the head. Frequentially, it's going to be this density that sits here. Okay. And you might feel it a little bit in your throat and in your heart space, but it's mainly going to be up here. Where when we talk about holding something, we're really talking about kind of dropping that and bringing it very consciously down into the heart, but then almost taking it and holding it in our hands, like in the body, and almost thinking of your body like a vessel, like a container. And you can bring that information from the lid of the container. You can spiral it down and begin to hold it a little bit deeper, a little bit lower. And just sort of sit with it and be present with it. So when we feel all this barrage of negative information and imagery and concepts and, all the stuff that's coming in and coming at us all day, every day, to just sit quietly and see if you can bring it from here, bring it from the mind and the thinking and the what are we going to do and how am I going to do it? And this is how it makes me feel. And just bring it down, firstly into your heart. And yes, it's sore. You might even physically feel the heart contracting or really and tears might start to come and you might feel emotional and let yourself cry, and then just see if you can bring it down a little bit deeper into your body and just sit with it, without thinking about it or without trying to fix it. Just sit with it until that heavy feeling, that fear, that angst, that resistance, until it starts to feel like compassion, until it starts to feel like love.
It's almost it's a contradiction, because it's almost like if you do the practice with the hope of releasing it into compassion, it's almost not going to work. Where you almost got to contradictory, sit. I know Mark Manson says that accepting a negative experience is in itself a positive experience. I know for me, I just wanted to touch that it is a practice, because I also think if you haven't done a practice like this before, it can be immensely overwhelming at first.
Yeah, and it is overwhelming. It's even, I do this practice almost daily. It's part of I do this, well, not almost daily. I sit with this practice after every person I work with, because I am working with their pain and their suffering and their trauma. And I have to transmute it and digest it within my own being and within my own body. So if I don't do that, I will become very, very ill, but it is always powerful and an emotional experience when you do it. And it is not comfortable. But when you get to that point where you can drop into love and into compassion, it is so extraordinary. And the depth at which we are capable of feeling and understanding one another and of our understanding for one another is extraordinary. And we can then drop into this really magical place called forgiveness. And when we can access that, then we move into a whole other realm of self-empowerment, and collective empowerment.
Yeah, I don't know if you if there was a simple, not process, but what do the stages look like in healing, say, the wounded masculine or feminine? Does it move through forgiveness, eventually gratitude, like I know, for example, in addiction models, it starts with denial. So is there like a general kind of process that people tend to go through that they could recognize signs of like, oh, there is a wound here that needs working on, and also knowing, what stage I'm in?
Yeah, I haven't actually thought of it from that perspective, but I wonder if it's not maybe similar to the sort of addiction model.
Yeah.
Because these things generally, the first place is denial, or just unawareness, oblivion,
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's it.
we can't address something that we don't know exist, if you, like I said, if you don't know that you have a cut on your leg, you're not going to remedy it, and the same with this kind of thing. If you have no awareness that this is affecting and influencing your life and your state of being, then you're not going to do anything about it. So the first step is stepping out of that denial and just looking at, how do I behave? What activates that behavior? Does it serve me? Does it serve my community? Does it serve the collective? If I don't feel like it does, what can I do gently and lovingly to begin to change that? And that's where the kind of different approaches come in. So for some of us, it might be very energetic, and it might be from a very feminine perspective, looking, more inward and more, from a more esoteric perspective. And then for others, it might be more masculine. This is the mind, this is the psychology of it. These are the practices that I can employ. But we have to find a balance between the two, between the being state and the doing state. Because they both serve a purpose. Yeah. But I think identification is the first thing. So this is the case for, I don't think there's a human being existing on the planet that is not embodying these different states. So this is not, this isn't isolated to some people, and other people are, don't have to worry about it. This is part of being a living entity, is that we have these energetic aspects, So like I said, I like working with that concept of the pie chart.
Yeah.
And the feeling for myself, okay, how's my pie sliced today? And how can I make the nicer slices of the pie a little bit bigger? But often also when those wounded aspects are triggered or activated, there's a reason for that. So then I also know that I need to kind of look into what's happening in my own field to go, okay, why am I feeling so, aggressive or so defensive, or so, why am I feeling like a victim today? Why am I feeling, why is this aspect of my personality or identity being activated? And how can I listen to that part of myself, and how can I bring it into more alignment, and there's part of that practice is also working with shadow work.
So why does shadow work, for those who wouldn't know?
Now you're opening a can of worms.
We don't have to.
No, I'll try and just touch it again. It's something that has different aspects, and if you're speaking more from a psychological perspective, then there's certain terminology around that. But fundamentally, our shadows are the abandoned parts of ourselves, and they are parts of ourselves that we abandon for various reasons, often through some kind of perceived trauma. We hide a part of ourselves because we feel it's unworthy, or because it's offensive somehow, or because it's wrong somehow. So that part of ourselves kind of goes and hides in the shadow aspects of our identities. It still influences us though. So just because it's hiding, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on the way that we behave, the way that we respond to our environments. And often, like our physical shadow, we can't see our shadow because it's behind us. And if we turn, it turns with us. But other people can see our shadow quite clearly. So when we speak of things like shadow work, it's really just coming to terms with and acknowledging and again, listening to those parts of ourselves that are hidden, the parts of ourselves that we are ashamed of, the parts of ourselves that carry our guilt. And yeah, there's various ways of working with that as well. There are more energetic ways. There's ways of working through the body's energy centers and working with the shadow, each of the energy centers. And then there's more psychological ways, doing it more from a psychological therapeutic perspective as well. But yeah, shadow work is wonderful and deep and powerful and magical work. It's not something that's frightening and scary and dark and demonic or anything like that.
Yeah.
It really is just looking at the unloved part of yourself, bringing them into the light, and they can become our greatest allies. They really can. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept and journey, because I think even for someone, if you loved singing in public as a little school kid and your parents shouted at you and then you never let that side out, it can be like a very positive trait or something that's very expressive that's been silenced. But I know, like, either people have heard the term shadow work, and even then, when you like, it's still quite a hard one to like pin a nail on and define like easily. But I certainly know if you haven't heard it, then people go, oh, like that sounds dodgy.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
It sounds scary and it sounds dark and it sounds a bit, like you said, it sounds a bit dodgy,
Yeah.
It's not. It really
self-work.
exactly. Well, we can, even if we think about inner child work, shadow work is it's inner child work. It's and we go a little bit deeper than just the inner child. We go to the collective child and the ancestral child, and but it's those parts, the parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, and the parts of ourselves that we hide for various reasons. And very often that happens exactly like you said. It happens in childhood when you express a side of yourself that excites you and you're super happy about it and it's amazing, and then it gets shut down. And then suddenly something that was so joyful and beautiful and expressive becomes something that you feel ashamed about, And it's often our greatest talents and our greatest skills can often be hidden underneath our shadows, which is quite sad, and that's where the shadow work becomes important. And it also helps us then to integrate those other, the masculine, feminine aspects with it. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, yeah, if you're a younger person, that idea of always having a wound or always having something to work through. I think a lot of people go through life thinking, why me, or why do I have to go through this pain? What is the lessons to be learned behind pain, and is there another side after being wounded or working through your wound?
Yeah, I think, not to sound sort of too dramatic now, but I actually think our most traumatic experience and our most painful experiences can really be our greatest gifts, because they carve us into a more complex being. If you were to go through life with no pain and no suffering and no complexity and no challenge, you'd be quite a shallow entity. There wouldn't be much to you. So those experiences make us deeper. They make us more complex. They give us the potential to be actually more powerful as living beings, and to have greater compassion and greater depth, and greater wisdom. And no one, me included, likes to have painful experiences. I definitely don't go and seek them out. But I am grateful for the ones that I have had in my life. And I don't feel that everything is something that we need to overcome,
Yeah.
We can get a little bit stuck on this ideology of we're constantly trying to better ourselves or to improve or to heal from something. And, I am very careful with sort of throwing the word healing around, because we've distorted that word a little bit, even things like we have to do the work and work on ourselves, it's not about constantly trying to be better or to improve. It's about trying to come into a deeper state of acceptance, and into a deeper capacity again for listening. It's not about changing the whole time or, refining so much. It's just about going, okay, how can I really drop into a state of listening, into a deeper state of awareness, into greater presence in my being, and into a greater sense of harmony. So instead of kind of looking for this healing thing, maybe rather looking for harmony, and if we think about harmonious things or harmony is complex. There's lots of different things going on. It's not just one thing, and it doesn't have a start and a finish. Where this idea of healing kind of has this misconception that if you do enough, eventually you're going to become healed.
Yeah.
I don't think life is supposed to work like that. We are cyclical beings. We cycle around, and every time we come around, we have the capacity for greater depth and complexity, and to notice more. So our journey really is a spiral one. It's not a journey from A to B and then it's done. Yeah.
I'm all fixed now.
That's it. I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we can, sometimes I often find that people get a bit fatigued, or they take on too much. Like, oh, I'm going to do this course, I'm going to do this shadow work, and I'm going to go to this plant medicine thing, and I'm going to do this, and it's like, okay, just calm down.
Yeah.
So
sometimes we
just sit with it a little bit. Yeah. Just sit with it a little bit. Often we find that if we just start to sit and become quiet and listen, so many of the answers that we're looking for out there are actually in here already.
Yeah, and then I think like, not that you get to a place, but eventually over time you start to listen and work with different practices, not in the pursuit of constantly trying to heal or change, but just because it's a practice that seems to bring more meaning and fulfillment and life force and energy into your life. So yeah, it's like change is inevitable. Like it will, you and everything will change regardless, but hopefully you're aiming for something, as you said, harmonious, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I find that our lives do become more harmonious, if we engage in these kinds of practices of awareness and presence and compassion and, just holding those feeling states and becoming more aware of how we become activated. Our lives definitely become less dramatic and more harmonious, and we mature. We become more mature, and the more mature we become, the less drama and upheaval we create around us and within us, and that's wonderful. It doesn't make life more boring. It just means that we have more space to experience things on a deeper level and don't have a desire to be on this kind of chaotic frequency very much, and that's quite pleasant. Moving towards that is quite pleasant. But it is also something that comes with age. We have to also give ourselves the right to be age appropriate. If you are in your early 20s, you don't have to be this perfectly balanced Zen, manifestation of enlightenment or whatever. You can be a little bit wild and a bit reckless and a bit all over the place. It's healthy.
Yeah.
It's what you're supposed to be doing. So allow yourself to be in your like that virile power and that that little bit of chaos that we can manifest when we're a bit younger.
Yeah, I think it's also yeah, I go to bed at 8:30 nowadays, so good. But yeah, I think it's partly our culture that everything is instant gratification. We want it now. You want anything, you order it, you get it the next day. And I think a lot of us approach healing or self-improvement or working on like wounded parts of yourself with that same mindset of like it must be now or this year, as opposed to being patient.
The hack culture, you know. Yeah. What's the hack? You know, and that's not. Yeah. That's, I mean, it's all fun and games, but it's not real. You know.
Yeah.
Really cultivating depth and understanding and harmony within our lives is not something that we can hack. You know, it's something that comes through time and commitment and spaciousness and listening and maturity and, you know, just, little steps, you know, towards something. And being willing to work that spiral again and again, you know, because it happens. We work through things and we think, oh, okay, done that. I'm good with that. That trauma has been healed, or that identity, that trigger, I'm not feeling it anymore. And then time passes and something happens and suddenly it happens again and you're right back where you were, you know. And it's easy to fall into that mindset of, oh, I didn't do it right, or why can't I do it? Why is other people moving on? Why am I still like this?
Yeah.
But that's, you know, you are supposed to come back around to the same experiences, you know, so that you can have them again and see if you can perceive things differently, you know, or find a different way. That's what we're supposed to be doing, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's important to be compassionate with ourselves as well, you know, on these journeys, and to not be too quick to jump on the hack bandwagon. Like, you know, there's some magic, you know, tool that I can take or tool that I can use that's going to fix me, you know.
Yeah.
We're not broken, you know.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for us as human beings to accept that we are quite multifaceted, you know, but that doesn't mean that we're broken. We just have lots of facets, you know.
Yeah.
We aren't just one clean sheet. Yeah. And if we can integrate that a little bit more, then again, we come into greater balance and greater harmony. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you. Yeah, I think we covered some deep things. I hope it's helpful or useful.
No, I loved it.
Okay.